You are listening to a 31 Pearls production audiobook. All rights are reserved. No part of this video or audio may be reproduced.
Chapter 8 of the Book of Creation. Extracted from the Great Book of the Sons of Fire. Read by 31 Pearls. Gwineva. Maeva, one-time wife of Datum, found refuge among the people of Ardis, where she gave birth to Gwineva the Cuckoochild. But as the child grew, it was seen that she had red hair. Though all knew there were fair-haired and dark-haired people, none had ever seen anyone with red hair. Also, strange maladies had manifested in Ardis, for which the strangers were blamed. Therefore, because of these things, Maeva and her child were driven out. They came to a pool near the border of Crocusus and built a habitation of reeds, living there for many years. However, Maeva was killed by a wild beast, and Gwineva was left alone. But she learned much from familiars who came to her. And so, she became a sorceress. Time went by, and the half-folk called Yoslings began to gather around her habitation. And they thought she was a goddess and worshipped her. As her fame spread, word came to Herthu concerning the strange woman. So he sent men to find out about her and report. Gwineva knew about Herthu, but he did not know who she was or that any child of Maeva lived. When Herthu heard the report, he was intrigued, and sent men to escort her to him. And she came at his request. They brought her into his presence, wearing a cloak of feathers and a garment of doeskin, her hair unbraided, like that of other women, falling outside the cloak almost to her knees. He was amazed at the cascade of red hair, and his heart was stirred by her beauty. Herthu gave Gwineva a bower and attendants, but she preferred to be attended by Yoslings whom the people about Herthu despised. They gossiped about the strange woman, for it was seen that Yosling men freely entered her bower. Yet her bearing was modest and maidenly, the Yoslings showing her every form of respect. It was the season of fruitfulness. And when Herthu went to the gathering place, he took Gwineva with him. But the Yoslings could not be taken there. So they remained behind, but the people removed them. When they arrived at the gathering place, and Gwyneva saw Gwineva, he was startled, for he had seen such a woman in the darkened waters. But he welcomed her, and was surprised at her wisdom and skill at sorcery. When the time came for Gwyneva to prophesy, and all who came to hear him were gathered about, they became apprehensive, for his coming forth was delayed. And the moon began to disappear, eaten away by the blackness of the night. Then, when they started to jostle and flee, there was a great shout, and Gwyneva appeared. As he did, a great fire sprang up on either side of him. The people remained, for each was rooted to the place where he stood. Gwyneva spoke at length, telling them that the night sky sign heralded a new era, that as the moon grew again in brightness, so should their race wax strong and virile, spreading wide across the face of the earth, driving lesser races before them. That a son of Herthu would lead their sons out of Crocusus, and his sons and their sons would continue westwardly towards Hesperus, meaning land of spirits. That there they would meet their final destiny. He told them that there would be a great bloodletting, when brother would fight with brother, and father with son. But that this would be the planting of the center pole, around which the framework for the structure of their race would be woven. He said, I shall go before the vanguard in spirit. Later Herthu asked Gwyneth to cast the omen sticks and read the ashes, as he wished to know things concerning Gwineva. This Gwyneth did, telling him that she was his fate mate, one destined to be his wife, that she was indeed a true maiden and he would not be foreridden. He said, she acts as she does, through innocence and not through brashness. But what Gwyneth told Herthu was no more than a grain in the grain sack among all that which he knew and saw. When Herthu returned to his home site, he paid court to Gwineva and asked her to marry him. And this she consented to do, after 1 year. The people, hearing what was intended, were displeased, and murmured against the marriage, saying it was unseemly for their king to marry a sorceress, and one strange in so many ways. Also, there was a custom forbidding the intermingling of blood. But there was no doubt as to what she was, some thinking she was one who could be acceptable. Gwineva was not the bloodkin of Herthu. So, as the marriage would not be incestuous, Gwineva decided she would say nothing of their relationship. For she was in love with him, and love is ever ready to make excuses. Yet, despite her knowledge and wisdom, her heart was full of fears because of her background. But she displayed none of her anxieties. She did not feel at ease among the people, but never asked that the Yoslings be allowed back. She tried to become acceptable by ministering to the sick with simples and remedies. But the more she cured and healed, the more people feared her. And fearing, they shunned her, except they were in dire need of her help. However, Herthu remained firm in his resolve to marry, though many advised that if he simply took Gwineva as a concubine or as something less than a wife, it would be more acceptable. They said none would object if she were treated as a woman with no standing. Mate but do not marry, for marriage would grant her undue status. And is marriage so necessary? Does a wise man buy the pie whereof he can freely eat at any time? Such sayings enraged Herthu, for he knew Gwineva to be a woman reserved for marriage. And this he tried to tell the people. But they laughed, saying, she has bewitched you, put her to the test. But he replied, this is unworthy, for it displays doubt and distrust. A virgin is a virgin, whether named so by horn or wand, and remains so, whatever the conjectures of carnal-minded men who are more familiar with women of lesser repute. Yet, whether the marriage bar applied was still a thing of doubt in the minds of many. For none knew the lineage of Gwineva, nor did she enlighten anyone, though it was customary to recite this at the betrothal. But Herthu and Gwineva remained unbetrothed, though the forthcoming marriage was made known. Now, the nephews and kin of Idalver nurtured seeds of discord among the people. And because it was a time of peace, when the skills of a war chief were not needed, many heeded their words. So it developed that there were those for Herthu and those against him. Then Herthu said to the people, let this not be something to cut people apart, but something which can be decided at the next folk feast. The seed-sowing time had passed, but it was not yet harvest-tide. And the young men held spear-throwing contests and tested each other in many manly skills. At such times, seated on a platform against the palisade, Herthu gave judgment and awarded merits. Inside the palisade was a walkway, and places from which great stones could be hurled. And from one such place came a murderous weapon, which cut down through Herthu's head to pierce the shoulder of his shield arm, striking him to the ground. Immediately there was a great tumult and confusion. Fighting broke out, and men died. But Herthu was carried to safety in the bower of Gwineva. There he was protected by his retainers. But within the palisade, all was taken over by those hostile to Herthu. Before the cowardly blow, those for Herthu had been more numerous and powerful. But after he was so sorely wounded, they were less. And of these, many were inclined to waver, for such is the nature of man. But to contrast with the frail reeds who wavered, those who remained loyal were resolute. For this too is the nature of man. Now, when Gwineva and the wise men attended to Herthu, they saw that while the shield arm had been injured, it was not unfeeling, for it grasped the hand of Gwineva. But this the sword arm could not do, though it was uninjured. Therefore they knew the slaughter-bent weapon had been charmed, and no woman could remove such enchantment, nor could the wise men, for they were unblooded. In the days that followed, the enchantment caused demons to enter through the wound and take up their abode. So Herthu was tormented, and his body racked, before subsiding into the quietness which precedes death. The demons had abused Gwineva, and called her foul names, and cried out in loud voices against people, so that they should abandon their king. The place where Herthu lay was near the lakeside, and in the lake was an island called Inskris, meaning Isle of the Dead, where those about to die were taken, as well as the dead, before being consigned to the waters. For the people believed that those given into the lake went straight into awareness in the other world, while anyone buried on land was only half aware upon arrival, and remained half awake and half asleep for many years. So those loyal to Herthu carried him down to the boats, and accompanied him and Gwineva to the isle. And they were not molested, for none interfered with those mourning the dead. On the isle were priests, and 9 holy maidens who attended to the rites, while other women ministered to the newly dead. But Herthu was dead, though halfway across the threshold. When Herthu arrived, he was placed in the hospice house, where Gwineva attended to him. Gwyneth opened Herthu's skull where it had been cleft, and let out the demon which had taken up habitation there. And he brewed powerful potions which removed the enchantment. When after many days he departed, Herthu was no longer at the door of death, though weak, and in many ways like a baby. While Herthu lay so sorely stricken, the kinsfolk of Idalvar were disputing among themselves, and this led to fighting and battles. But none came near the isle to harm Herthu, because it was a sacred place, and gave him sanctuary. When it came to the time of the folk feast, there was a great battle at the gathering place, and Gwyneth was slain. There came a day when Herthu, though still not whole, could move about. And then he and Gwineva departed, with those who remained with them. They were married before leaving their isle of sanctuary. They fled to a place afar off where, as the years went by, Herthu became whole again, and Gwineva gave birth to sons and daughters. It was a good place, fertile and well-watered, and so they prospered. But there came a time of drought when the waters dried up and their flocks died. So Herthu sent men to Crocusus, And these came back, saying that there too the land was stricken and the people distressed. He also sent others to the west. And they returned, saying that there the land was not stricken. But the people would not accept them except with spears. Herthu then sent men back to Croesus to tell the people there of the plenty which lay to the west. And they came back with a war band led by Italus. And many people followed. Herthu could no longer bear weapons. And his sons were as yet young and unblooded. Therefore he gave his 2 sons, who were of sufficient age, into the keeping of Italus, so they might learn the art of war. And they followed him loyally, becoming men of valor in the conflict which ensued. Many people left Croesus and settled in the land lying to the west. And Herthu and Gwineva also settled there. Time passed, and Herthu became renowned for his wisdom. And Italus, king of Erenea, honored him with lands and servants. Herthu's 2 sons, who had followed the king and were twins, married the king's 2 eldest daughters, who were also twins. This caused problems, for the king, though having 3 wives, was sonless. Therefore, the twin sons of Herthu became his heirs. The king was perplexed, for the 2 men could not rule together, and both were of equal standing in his eyes. Yet it was the king's duty to nominate his heir, and proclaim him to the people, so there should be no division after his death. Therefore Italus consulted Herthu as to how the judgment should be made. And Herthu said, "Let fate decree who shall be king." In Erenea, the people gathered 4 times a year for the folk feasts. At such times it was customary for new laws to be proclaimed, judgments given, and all contentious issues settled. So before the next folk feast, Herthu prepared a man-made stone from sand, clay, and other things. And while it was still soft, he set the hilt of his great sword, Dislana the Bitterbiter, into it. And when the stone was hardened, Dislana was fast. The sword-implanted stone was then set down near the place where the king gave judgment. Around it was drawn a wide circle, bisected across. On the day when the people were first assembled to hear his words, Italus told them of his perplexity over the problem concerning the twin sons of Herthu and his daughters. He said, "So the people are not divided, and the kingdom rent by strife. It is well, this matter be settled now. Therefore, I am setting a fair test, involving no men other than these 2, whom I hold equally dear. Whichsoever of them shall remove their father's great weapon from the stone, so he frees it and grasps the hilt, shall become my lawful heir, with the other being to him as a younger brother. They will each try in turn during the duration of the fall of a feather. The first trier being he who casts his bracelet over the blade. Then each of Herthu's sons was placed in a spot where the bisecting line joined the circle. So they stood opposite each other, and each had 3 bracelets. They threw until one encircled the blade with his bracelet. Then this one tried to withdraw the weapon with his hand but could not, because of the sharpness. The other tried, by placing his 2 palms on each side of the blade, then pressing them together while lifting. But he could not move it either. The first one tried again, copying what had just been done, more powerfully. So the stone almost lifted off the ground, but the sword did not leave the stone. Then the other approached the stone. But this time, he put his hands under the edges of the stone, so he could lift it in his arms. And he dashed it down, over a rock which was nearby, so it broke asunder. He then picked Dislana up by the hilt, and brandished it over his head. The people acclaimed him while his brother grasped his arms in congratulations. Thus, by wisdom was the problem overcome. End of the Book of Creation, extracted from the Great Book of the Sons of Fire. Produced by 31 Pearls. Please remember to subscribe, like, and comment.